Hello. Привіт.
Hello, Claudia.
Слава
Богдаш.
Україні.
Слава Україні.
Доброго вечора.
Добрий вечір. I think every participant of our discussion is here right now, so we can start this discussion. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to welcome every participant, every distinguished participant of this panel, all organizers and participants of fourth international conference named after famous Ukrainian scientist Yuri Knorozov, which brought a lot of knowledge about cultures of ancient civilizations of Latin America to the whole world. I would like to sincerely thank to Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev and Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism for supporting this idea, for organizing this event, for organizing a panel about Ukrainian-Brazilian relations. Brazil is the biggest country in this part of the world. And our relations have a lot of dimensions which we would like to develop. I would like to thank every Brazilian and every Ukrainian participant of this discussion because right now, especially in this period before general elections in Brazil, it's good opportunity to prove both for Brazilian and for Ukrainian society how important are relations between Ukraine and Brazil for both societies. So this conference is a perfect opportunity to discuss not only what was in the past between two states, but also to discuss some plans for the future. Because right now we have the situation during peace negotiations. We hope that the next year Ukraine finally will see some peaceful conditions of life, and in the same time in Brazil there will be a lot of political events. So as an embassy, the embassy of Ukraine in Brazil, all diplomats will focus activity to develop, to organize more events the next year and to bring more connections between Ukrainian and Brazilian journalists, Ukrainian and Brazilian political scientists, young leaders, etc. So all these ideas we can discuss today. And for the first participant of our Brazilian panel, I would like to welcome Mr. Volodymyr Lakomov, ambassador of Ukraine to Federal Republic of Brazil, Bolivia, since 2007 until 2010. Thank you so much for your participation, Your Excellency. You could start.
Thank you, George. Do you hear? Yeah, okay. So, dear friends, thank you sincerely for the invitation to join this important conversation. Allow me to take a retrospective look at the development of relations between Ukraine and Brazil and Latin America more broadly, based on my personal experience in this part. I recall that the question of strategy and tactics for building effective and mutually beneficial cooperation first confronted me back in 1997 when I arrived to Brazil to serve at our embassy as a consulero on economic and scientific technological cooperation. I recall with both joy and emotion the time when Ukrainian and Brazilian diplomats, scientists, experts, and officials were united by an idea, or rather by a dream, to create a true miracle, the most modern spaceport and launching pad on Amazonian soil, bringing out a space one step closer to humanity. Without going into unnecessary details, I will say directly. Together, Ukrainians and Brazilians, we were working together as one, succeeded in initiating or launching the landmark project Alcantara Cyclone Space, which for many years became the backbone of our cooperation. Funzionavamo come uma equipe verdadeiramente extraordinária, assim como as lendárias seleções brasileiras campeãs mundiais. We worked then as one truly fantastic team, a comparison that naturally arises with the Brazilian national soccer teams when they brilliantly triumphed at World Football Championship. This project, in my view, carried extraordinary significance not only for our two countries and Latin America, but also in the global context. Its dynamic and challenging implementation was marked by a special spirit of interaction, the creation of a united team called Alcantara Cyclone Space Joint Venture, Empresa Binacional, whose members understood each other instantly and achieved truly remarkable results. With gratitude, I want to mention some names, key Brazilian figures publicly known. They include Roberto Amaral, Director General representing Brazil at hearings and public events. Brigadier Reginaldo Santos, appointed Director of the ACS in 2011. João Ribeiro, Deputy Technical Director, also representing Brazilian leadership at ACS events. The project enjoyed political support from Brazil's senior leadership, including Ronaldo Motto Sardenberg, former Minister of Science and Technology, and Roberto Mangabeira Unger, head of the Secretariat for Strategic Affairs at the time. The project was supported, of course, and remained under personal attention of the presidents of two countries, of our countries. Yet the project regularly faced opposition, primarily from competitors, countries that consider themselves leading space powers. I'm confident that this endeavor had this endeavor succeeded, it would have opened the door to space exploration and research for the global south, enabling even universities there and their students to bring their ideas to life in orbit. Also, the project was abruptly halted. I prefer not to call it a death or sad ending. I believe it will one day rise again like a phoenix. Its analysis deserves a dedicated discussion among Ukrainian and Brazilian experts. Importantly, ACS opened doors to other spheres of cooperation and stimulated broader development of Ukraine-Brazil relations. Parallel projects emerged in pharmaceuticals, production of high-quality insulin using Ukrainian technology, energy engineering, manufacturing of complex equipment, including powerful transformers under bilateral intergovernmental agreement, aviation, dialogue started between Antonov and Embraer as potential partners for joint production, and of course, biofuels. Ukrainian enterprises exploring Brazil's experience in renewable energy. It was precisely during this period that our bilateral trade flourished, reaching its peak both in volume and structure. The Alcantara Cyclone space case illustrates how geopolitically promising and technological asymmetric cooperation can collapse not due to technical flaws, but because of institutional weakness and political volatility. Ukraine entered the project with world-class rocket technology, while Brazil provided important critical infrastructure and political will and support. When Brazil's internal crisis shifted national priorities, the infrastructure component proved most vulnerable, undermining the entire project. What lessons learned from this story? First, political support is not a substitute for institutional guarantees. Ukraine and Brazil must insist on legally binding mechanisms, clear financing schedules, and compensation procedures. Second, asymmetry of contributions creates asymmetry of risks. Both states bore the losses, highlighting the need for phased cooperation models. 3. Partnerships with power of the Global South are generally vulnerable to domestic political cycles. Diversification and involvement of third parties, financial institutions, export credit agencies, multilateral guarantees are essential. Technology without highly skilled economic diplomacy is fragile. Ukraine and Brazil must combine technical expertise with active and professional contractual diplomacy to safeguard national interests. Ultimately, ACS project provided Ukraine and Brazil with both reputational and educational value. It demonstrated that trust in international technological alliances must rest not only on political declarations, but also on firm legal and financial mechanisms. In conclusion, Brazil has been and remains Ukraine's leading trading partner in Latin America, with trade volumes 2 to 3 times higher than with Argentina, or Chile. And I firmly believe that the golden age of our relations is not behind us, but ahead. Ukraine's victory against Russian aggression will open new unprecedented opportunities, and our ties with Brazil will serve as a vital and reliable instrument for advancing cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm telling right now from my mobile phone, because even here sometimes there are storms and there is no internet right now because of this. Thank you so much for this interesting historical excursion in this. I think the most famous is the most productive period of Ukrainian-Brazilian cooperation. It was really a golden age of Ukrainian-Brazilian relations. Thank you so much, Mr. Lakomov, Ambassador Lakomov. And I would like to give opportunity to speak to Mr. Sviatoslav Jurash, the head of friendship group with Brazil in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Parliament of Ukraine.
Greetings, gentlemen and ladies. It is great to join you today. I'm sorry for the fact that we are in this capacity and with limited time. And I'm sorry it is but one event of this sort when Ukraine needs so many more to truly develop deeper ties with the vast potential of the giant South. As in my IR courses in universities that I've attended, it was referred to about South America and Brazil especially. As far as the reality of the friendship group in the parliament, it's always usually seen as somewhat limited instrument on just establishing personal relations. But thanks to the many people that are on this call as well, I'm very thankful for all the help through the years in establishing many relationships and helping them gather more strength. Alas, my firm belief that it's not just about these relationships. It is mostly about building up institutions that can sustain for many political generations to come the relationship between our nation and the giant of the South. And again, having been blessed by all of you, great, magnificent experts and doers and thinkers, I had the pleasure to organize meetings with Ukrainian institutions, foreign affairs, this presidential office, and in between these circles. And I firmly believe that this all should come together into an institution that can focus exclusively on the giant of the South.
Breakthroughs. And I must tell you that Ukrainian rocket or missiles industry will be high class in the world, maybe number one or at least a top 3 in the world. I'm sure for that. And Brazil and Ukraine could use this opportunity to continue our cooperation for peaceful goals, of course, but it depends on the situation. But right now, I'm a very big fan, and I'd like to speak in details about Global South because my experience was based only on Global South countries, let's say so. Brazil, Angola, and Pakistan. I know all these 3 parts of the Global South. And my heart is in all these countries, parts of my heart in Brazil, Angola, and Pakistan. Thank you, Vicente, for the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sviatoslav Yurosh.
Sure, I think these delineations, Global South, Global North, is quite arbitrary. The reality is that I see much passion for term Indo-Pacific in the so-called Global South, much more and much preferred over Global South. Alas, that term doesn't apply to Brazil. It doesn't have a Pacific coast. But the truth is, as far as these delineations, it's not a question of who has which coastline and who is more north and who is more south. It's the question, what do we have to offer to each other? What ideas, what projects, what relationships we build between one another. And that depends on you, great people. You pursuing these projects, ideas, relationships, and allowing the flourishing of cooperation. And honestly, let me turn far from Ukraine. I've listened to plenty about the relationship with Paraguay and Taiwan, for example. And Paraguay and Taiwan have a great deal in common, many projects, much investment, much understanding, recognition, and much beyond. And all that is not because they share a coastline of any kind, not because they are in the same geographic disposition or in the same economic parity. It's because of the efforts of people on both sides, developing, fostering these relations, and bringing them to fruition. I think that is why it's far more important that people like you pursue these relationships, projects, institutions that bind our nations together. And that is a far stronger bond than any arbitrary delineation of any categorization.
Yes. I could add, of course, Mr. Sviatoslav, I remember from my experience in Brazil that together with our good friend, Deputado Federal Cajado, we were dreaming about, creating, not only we dreaming about, space project when he will be realized, but also about creating, Embraer Antonov joint venture, which could create third biggest aircraft industry company in the world, beside Boeing and European Airbus. So it was our dream, of course, and they were quite real, of course, I'm sure, and will be real in future. So it's not a third world. It's, our, let's say, dreams and ways how to realize them.
Yeah, I would like only thank you, Volodymyr Ivanovich, Mr. Ambassador Lakomov. I would like to add that maybe Ukraine could understand the problems and the history of Global South better than many other European countries, because even like the simple example, slavery, well, the most famous poet was bought actually like from крепостництво. It was almost the same like slavery. So we understand many problems. We understand like history of nations which were oppressed during centuries, which fought for their independence during centuries. And the second topic, which was during this first part of this discussion about technologies, of course, we would like to bring in Brazil more Ukrainian technological companies. So the next year it will be Rio Web Summit. So we would like to start from software companies, but in the final stage, I think after the war, not only for Brazilian military, but military forces, but for many civil enterprises, it will be interesting to have cooperation with Ukrainian drone production enterprises, etc. All these technologies could be used like both in the military field and civil field. So we hope that it will be possible, and it will be political willingness to do this, because actually, like Ambassador Lakomov mentioned it, well, it was not enough the political support at the time for this project. There were so many factors which were obstacles for this project, Alcantara project, which was like the symbol of this golden age in Brazilian-Ukraine relations. Well, if there are not other questions, I would like to announce Brazilian.
George, I will remember. I will recall Vicente that I have sent you an article about possible cooperation between Ukraine and Brazil, Ukraine, Latin America, and creating autonomous artificial intelligence systems. Did you receive my article about that? I will send again to you. That's very interesting idea.
Yeah, actually, we can discuss even later. Yeah, I would like to announce all Brazilian participants of our Brazilian panel. Fabrício Vitorino, digital journalism specialist, PhD candidate, Federal University of Santa Catarina. Mr. Vicente Ferraro, PhD, Dr. Vicente Ferraro, PhD in political science, researcher at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation and the University of São Paulo. Uria Fonselli, international relations analyst, commentator at CNN Portugal and many Brazilian media outlets. Dr. Claudio Cavalcante Jr., representative of Ukrainian Free University of Brazil, Vira Selansky Vovk. Mr. Fabio Lambert, Dr. Fabio Lambert, excuse me, representative of the Department of Philosophy, Cluster of Excellence, Knowledge in Crisis, University of Vienna. So I would like to give the first opportunity to speak to Dr. Vicente Ferraro.
Thank you very much. I will share a presentation. Just confirm to me, please, if you can see it. Just a second. Can you see it?
Yes.
Is it working? Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's working.
So My presentation today is called How Ukraine is Perceived in Brazil, Challenges and Opportunities for Improving Bilateral Relations. So I'm trying to show like we can improve our relations from the standpoint of a scholar, because I think that there are many areas in which we can improve our relations, and I'm trying to do that inside the Brazilian academia. First, I would like to show you some impressions from traveling to Ukraine. My first visits were in January and May of 2013. I've been there to Kharkiv, Sum, and Kiev. There, I had the opportunity to see some cultural features of Ukraine that I try to show to my students, to other people, to other scholars in Brazilian academia. So I think it's very interesting in order to improve our relation is like to try to show our cultural features, our cultural traditions, and I think that for all Brazilians, like the Ukrainian cultural traditions are very interesting. Like many Brazilians would be happy to know more about Ukrainian culture. So for me, it was like very interesting to see the Ukrainian Christmas in January, the Ukrainian wedding, the Ukrainian Lasnia, no, or Banya, the Epiphany ice plunge in January too. And because of these cultural traditions, I really got interested in Ukrainian history, politics, culture, music, and even language. And my third opportunity to visit Ukraine was in February, March of this year. I visited like 6 regions, and it was also interesting to see the difference from the peacetime and the wartime. And I think that Ukraine changed a lot from 2013 to now. Just some pictures of this period in 2013, like in Sum, the Ukrainian wedding that I mentioned to you, that's very different from Brazilian wedding. So I think it's like an important way to get the interest of Brazilians towards Ukraine, like to show like cultural traditions and the difference between Brazil and Ukraine. Regarding the relations between Brazil and Ukraine, unfortunately, we can say that most Brazilians knew almost nothing about Ukraine. Maybe they knew something about Chernobyl and the USSR, but on the other hand, like the war is very bad, it's a very bad event. But on the other hand, I think the war increased interest in this part of the world. If we can say that we have something positive from the war in Brazil, is that people got more interested in Ukraine. I think probably Claudio will mention about that, like Ukrainian, we have a huge Ukrainian diaspora in southern Brazil, nearly half a million people of Ukrainian descent. It is the third largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world after Canada and the United States. A large part of this diaspora is in the city of Prudentopolis, like 75% of its population are of Ukrainian descent. Unfortunately, we have modest commercial relations and low levels of political, social, and academic interaction. Now we are trying to change something, like to change this picture in academia. We recently created the Center for Ukrainian Studies at the University of São Paulo, and we are trying like to bring Ukrainian voices to Brazil. Like here's the state of Paraná, where Prudentopolis is located. And I would like also to tell you about, maybe Fabio and Fabrício will also talk about that, the information about Ukraine that we have in Brazil. I think we have different perspectives. We can say that in society and mass media, we have predominantly pro-Ukrainian views, like there is a broad consensus in interpreting the conflict as a Russian war of aggression. But unfortunately, in Brazilian academia, and maybe in politics too, there is a clear polarization in interpretation. The polarization between the fact that this is the Russian war of aggression and the myth that this is a Russian defense against NATO. So why does it happen? why we have this so strong disinformation in Brazilian academia. So firstly, we can see that we have more or less developed as a developed academic field in Brazil, the Russian studies. So we have like Russian studies in some universities with many pro-Russian scholars, but virtually we don't have Ukrainian studies. We are trying to change this picture now with the, as I mentioned to you, the Center for Ukrainian Studies. We have Russia specialists. They are invited to comment in the mass media. They have a knowledge of the Russian language, but no knowledge of Ukrainian language and Ukrainian history, or at least Ukrainian history from the perspective of Ukrainian scholars. We also have a low initial level of knowledge about Ukraine. So that's why we have a dominance of Russia-centric perspectives in academia. Ukraine is unfortunately is often portrayed as a geopolitical vacuum between Russia and the West. Another factor is the history of European and American imperialism in Latin America. So we have a very big resentment against the US because the US like supported military dictatorship during the Cold War. So they said like they are democracy, they support democracy, but indeed in Latin America for many decades they supported military dictatorship, and that's why we have a resentment until now inside the Brazilian academia. And because of that, NATO is perceived. NATO was created during the Cold War, during the spirit of military dictatorship, and therefore it's perceived as an instrument of American imperialism. If Russia is against the US, therefore Russia is against imperialism. There is a huge lack of understanding or indifference towards Russia's imperial history. And I'm trying to show to Brazilian academia the truth about Russia's imperial history. We also have the rapprochement with Russia that is perceived as a counterbalance to Western imperialism, like BRICS, and the New World Order is perceived as some kind of counterbalance against the US imperialism. We also, in many international relation courses, we have the realist school. Maybe it's the most important, the most influential school of international relations in Brazil. And usually the realist school perceives Russia's actions as a reaction against NATO enlargement. So, and I think that it's not only in Brazil, it's also in other countries. We also have many misconceptions about the Soviet Union and Russia. So, as you know, poverty and social inequalities are the main problems in Brazil, of Brazil. And there is a very romanticized view that the USSR successfully addressed these issues. There is a false belief that Russia and Putin represent a continuation of socialism in the USSR, and also a lack of understanding of Russia's domestic politics. So I try like to show to Brazilian academia the reality of Russia's domestic politics, the reality of Putin's authoritarianism. It's very hard, but we are trying to change this picture. We also have here the influence of Russian media, like Sputnik Brazil. It's not significant in society, but it's growing. Its influence is growing among scholars. Like I know many scholars at the University of São Paulo that follow Sputnik Brazil. So among scholars, it is more or less influential. So now I'm studying the war in Ukraine, and I would like to show to you why it is important to study it in Brazil. I consider that the Russian war crimes shatter all Russian myths, like the defense of the Russian words. When we studied the war in Ukraine, we can see that the defense of the so-called Russian word, the Ruski Mir, is carried out through torture, destruction, and mass killings. I interviewed many Ukrainians when I was in Ukraine, and most of them a large part of them were tortured when they were in the occupied territories. The population of Donbass has suffered the most from the invasion. So Russia says that they are liberating Donbass, but indeed the population there has suffered the most from the invasion. The resistance and under occupation shows that the Russian-speaking Ukrainians did not wait for liberation, as Russia said. Russian policies in the occupied territories reveal traditional imperial practice and fascist tendencies. So I usually show to my students like what is to live under Russian occupation. So many of them think that Russia was liberating Ukraine, that people in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, they wanted to be liberated. And I think it's very important to show to them what is to live under Russian occupation. This is an interview that I conducted in Ukraine at the beginning of this year. So this teacher mentioned to me the school principal. They passed down the streets in military vehicles, armed, entering houses while armed. It was an horrible situation. You see a dirty soldier in boots walking around your home, throwing your things to the floor, scattering them, going through your personal belongings, demanding your phone, searching everything. It was terrifying. So I show it to my students to show what is to live under occupation. So military occupation is an open-air prison stripped of any legal protection. The occupier imposed its own law, prosecuting and punishing anyone perceived as a threat. The risks are constant, both in the streets and inside one's home. So I did this research, like my main questions were, what are the main impacts of conflict on education professionals, of the war on education professionals, and what are their response strategies in this context? I recently, with other colleagues, we published this paper about the war in Ukraine, and we are trying to fight the Russian disinformation, not only in Brazil, but in other countries too, using this paper. We conducted online and face-to-face semi-structured and in-depth interviews. We had 55 interviews in total with Ukrainian teachers and school principals. We interviewed education professional experts like Alexandra Matvichuk. I also conducted field work in 6 Ukrainian regions and visited the occupied locations near Kherson. So these were the regions in Ukraine and Moldova that I visited at the beginning of this year. Most of the interviews were from Kherson and Mykolaiv, and most of them were from the education field and some of them from emergency service too. So I try to show to my students what consequence the war had for Ukrainian education, especially in the occupation. And so I'm trying to show that through the education, the Russians are implementing a cultural genocide in Ukraine. So there were pressures, threats, arrests on school principals and teachers. I showed to them that the territorial control depends not only on armies, but also on schools. So the Russians, they tried to implement the Russian curriculum, teaching the Russian history, language, politics. So they are trying to convince Ukrainian children that they are not Ukrainian, but they are Russians. So I think that the schools, they are a source of community and of community integrity. And the Russians, they know about that, so they try to destroy schools, they try to control the schools as an attempt to erase Ukrainian national identity and memory. It's very hard to convince an adult or an old person that he or she is not Ukrainian, is Russian. It's very difficult to convince, but a children is easier. So there is a forced assimilation and political indoctrination of children, the so-called Russification, the identity manipulation, the destruction of Ukrainian books, the bans on the national language, the pressure on parents to send their children to Russian schools. And we can call that a cultural genocide. Like Raphael Lemkin, the creator of the definition of genocide, mentioned that genocide is not only the physical destruction of a people, but also the destruction of its culture and social and political institutions. So I usually show to my students like what is this children's militarization in schools, like children are being prepared to fight in the future for the Russian side, like the political indoctrination, they have to watch like videos of Vladimir Putin's speech. This was a school that I visited in Snihurivka, in Mykolaiv regions. I saw like many schools destroyed in the region of Mykolaiv. So as I mentioned to you, like Russians are destroying schools as an attempt to erase Ukrainian identity. So a last interview excerpt, like anything, it was from a teacher from Snihurivka, Mykolaiv region. Anything connected to Ukraine had to be forgotten. You didn't even want to talk because you never knew who was next to you. We didn't know whether a person was decent or whether they were collaborating with the Russian authority. On my last slide, how we could strengthen relations between our countries. So I'm telling to you from the standpoint of a scholar. No? So I think we can improve academic and institutional partnerships. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we created the Center for Ukrainian Studies at the University of São Paulo. We are trying to bring Ukrainian voice into Brazil's academic space. We now have an agreement with NAUCMA, but we also want to have agreement with other universities. We have two other colleagues here, like Fabio and Fabrício are also members of the Center for Ukrainian Studies. And I think that from the side of Ukraine, the National University of Kyiv, Taras Shevchenko, and other universities could also create, I don't know if you already have it, but if you don't have it, you could also create a Center for Brazilian or Latin American Studies. We could promote internships and international exchange, not only between teachers, but also between students, like to promote cultural diplomacy, to promote lectures, academic and cultural events about our countries, like to focus during the lectures, like to focus on shared features between our countries, like the history of imperialism, the colonialism, the slavery that Heorhii just mentioned, like the history of slavery, social and economic challenges, our common authoritarian past and the pursuit of democracy, our history of violations of human rights. We have many violations of human rights now in Brazil, and in Ukraine you also have because of the war. We could also promote joint publications and co-supervision of academic work, co-supervision of students, joint defense committees for academic thesis. For example, if you have some students that is working on Brazil or Latin America, I would be happy to join the defense committee. And on the other hand, if we have some students working with Ukraine, we could also invite Ukrainian scholars to participate in these defense committees and to share academic materials like books, articles, and other materials among us. So we can, like, as you mentioned, as Ambassador Volodymyr Lakomov and Heorhii Erman mentioned, we could promote institutional ways to, inside academia, to improve our relations. So thank you very much, Diácono Dalvarro. This is my contact. I will be happy to stay in touch with you all. Here are just some pictures. At the very beginning of this year, I gave a lecture at the National University of Kyiv. Some pictures of this period at the Kherson State University, schools in Mykolaiv. I'm trying to show to my students how schools and universities in Ukraine are surviving during the war. And for them, it's very interesting because many of them, they think that the Russian occupation, everything was good. And when I show to them what the Russian occupation is, they get really interested, like, to know the truth about this war. Like, thank you very much. I will send you the links to some articles and we can stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vicente, for this interesting presentation. Are there any questions to the speaker? So I would like to ask, actually, you mentioned it about Sputnik Brazil and this pro-Russian political views which are spreading among academic society. How could you advise to deal with this problem actually for Ukrainians in Brazil? It was only this year started its work UATV Portuguese, which is wonderful TV channel. Miss Lada Filatova is present here from this TV channel. So it's the first media project, like TV media project for Portuguese language speakers. But how could we improve this opportunity to bring news for Brazilian society to make more connections with academic society in Brazil to fight this Russian propaganda?
Thank you very much for the question, Heorhii. I think that in academia we need more academic channels, like to bring more Ukrainian scholars to Brazil, like to promote cooperation between academic institutions, as we are doing now at the University of São Paulo. So we need to show what Ukrainian scholars are publishing now about the war, about Russian imperialism. Because many people, they read something about the war, maybe from Russian scholars or from pro-Russian scholars, but they have never read anything from Ukrainian scholars. So I think that we should bring more academic content to Brazilian students, to Brazilian scholars, but content that was produced by Ukrainian scholars, like papers in English, of course, papers and books. So, and especially as I mentioned, and as you already mentioned, showing our common paths in the past, like the slavery system in Ukraine, the colonial system during the Russian Empire, during the Soviet Union, like the Holodomor. Many people, they don't know anything about the Holodomor, the occupation in Crimea and Donbass since 2014. Like many people, they just think that the war just started in 2022, but I think we could show that the war started maybe not even in 2014, even before that there was already a Russian aggression against Ukraine, a Russian informational war. Like maybe since the Orange Revolution, there is a information war going on. That's my opinion. So I'm trying to prove the relations inside academia and bringing Ukrainian voices. I think it's a very positive way to change this picture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your answer. We are acting in this direction. We would like to open. We would like to persuade Ukrainian universities to open more Latin American centers. So right now we have at least 4 universities which have in some form at least Latin American studies: Taras Shevchenko University, Mechnikov University in Odessa, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, Ukrainian Catholic University. So we would like to, maybe it will be possible the next year to add to this number at least 3 other universities. But on the Brazilian ground, we have some obstacles, like administrative obstacles. So I can present an example that this year, for example, Ukrainian political scientist Alexander Slavchuk, which is representative of Transatlantic Dialogue Center, he visited Brasilia, but it was not possible for him to meet with students in one university. But in the same time, this university had a meeting with ambassadors of United Russia Party who spoke about BRICS. So in case of Brazil, really we have some situation when some universities which we can say private or Catholic, they are open for the cooperation, but many other universities, they are not open for this cooperation, even according to the administrative some organization of these events. So,
but if we are creating a network of universities that I think would be happy to receive Ukrainian scholars, I'm sure that Fabrício could help with there to promote, like Fabrício already promoted an event at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. We can also promote at the University of São Paulo. I have contacts at the University of the Pampas Gaúchos, Universidade Federal dos Pampas Gaúchos. There are not so many, but I think these are influential universities. And there are many people in academia that support pro-Russian views, but also there are many people with pro-Ukrainian views. Our group is growing on, and I think next year we will grow even more. So we will have more opportunities to bring Ukrainian voice.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions to the speaker? Okay, so I would like to present the next speaker is Dr. Claudio Cavalcanti Jr. From the Ukrainian Free University of Brazil, Vyroslansky Vovk. You could start.
Good afternoon, good evening. Can you listen to me?
Yes, yes.
Добрый вечер. Thank you, Mr. Erman, for the invitation. I want to thank you, Ivan Fechko and Mr. Oskar Zlushenko and Lada Flatova, the supporter to participate to this panel. It's an honor, and I'm very, very happy to be here today. So I have a PhD in human science, cultural anthropology from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. My thesis defended in March of this year deals with politics in Ukrainian diaspora in Brazil, as well integration of Ukrainians into Brazilian society, interethnic relations, and the relations with Brazilian state, in addition to impacts of the large-scale invasion. It is difficult to answer the question that titles this panel, so I will try to explain how Ukraine gained my support and how I try help Ukraine to gain support as well. I was born in Rio de Janeiro. Actually, I was born in Niterói, close to Rio de Janeiro, where I completed all my academic training for almost 16 years. I have lived in Paraná. I still live in Paraná, in a town called União da Vitória, a pioneering region of Ukrainian presence in Brazil. The Ukrainians arrived in the region in 1896. I live on a street that bears the name of the Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca, Marechal Deodoro da Fonseca in Portuguese, who was the first president of Brazil. On the same street, we find the São Basílio Church, San Basil Church, a Greek Catholic church, and the União da Vitória Ukrainian club founded in 1923 as Brazilian Ukrainian Union, Ukrainsky Soyuz v Brazili, which currently has its headquarters in Curitiba, capital of Paraná, and is called today the Ukrainian Society in Brazil, Sociedade Ucraniana do Brasil, or SUBRAS, where it developed cultural activities nowadays. Here, we also find in União da Vitória, between the church and the club, a Ukrainian square named Ukrainian Square, where there is a statue of Taras Shevchenko. These are some examples of the visibility of Ukraine and Ukrainians in Tao, in interior of Brazil. This is the result of more than 130 years of Ukrainian immigration to Brazil, which can be divided into three waves. The first wave was from the end of the 19th century until 1914. The second was between the interwar period, and the third was after the Second World War. The ancestors of descendants of Ukrainians carried Australian passports in the first wave. They came from Austro-Hungarian Empire. Polish passports in the second wave, they came from territories under Polish rule. And in the third wave, they was stateless. Most were Ostarbeiters, victims of forced labors, deported to Germany, and who did not return to Ukraine. Then completely under Soviet rule after Second World War. We would have a problem defining who is of Ukrainian nationality in the diaspora if we limited ourselves to the papers, to the documents. However, these Ukrainians remain Ukrainians even after integration into Brazilian society over several generations. Even so, there is limited involvement of Brazilians with Ukrainian roots in mobilization actions against a Russia-Ukrainian war, since they are all Brazilians. I must clarify that there is a group of Ukrainian Brazilians doing a good job. There is also the presence of a fourth wave Ukrainians who come to Brazil after the reestablishment of Ukraine's independence in 1991. The sociological profile of these what I call new Ukrainians is very different than those of previous waves. Most of the Ukrainians who come to Brazil in previous waves were agricultures, laborers, agricultures, and this profile of new Ukrainians are very different. They are very well educated. These new Ukrainians organized a demonstration against against the war, together with some citizens of Russian Federation, and live in context distinct from the Ukrainian diaspora in Brazil or the Brazilians with Ukrainian roots. Mobilization against the Russian invasion of Ukraine that occur are not often anymore, and now and have low participation. I attended two demonstrations in São Paulo, once in 2022 and another in 2023, and one in Rio de Janeiro this year, in August of this year. It is a challenge to Ukrainians and Brazilians engaged in this struggle to publicize the Ukrainian cause. In the context of the fight against Russian imperialism, we try to spread that Ukraine was a Russian colony, and in the past, of course, and that Putin's goals in Ukraine are merely imperialist and illegal from the point of view of international law. Unlike other contexts before 2014, before the start of Russia-Ukraine war, there was no impasse regarding territories that are part of Ukraine, recognized under the since the reestablishment of the Ukrainian state. Here in Brazil, it's important to say there's a certain stretch of the Russian propaganda, as Mr. Dr. Ferraro said, in different media and with the different narratives affecting both those who claim to be progressive or liberal in American sense, and those who claim to be conservative. Russian presence in Brazil is not viewed with suspicion, nor is it subject to sanctions as in other contexts. news in traditional media about the Russians in Florianopolis real estate market, or the annual selection of Bolshoi or Bolshoi ballet theater school branch in Joinville. Both cities in the state of Santa Catarina do not establish a link with what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. It seems there is a positive image of Russians who are certain in Brazil, leaving aside the espionage cases here. There are 9 that we know until now. We also have Russian action, those soft power, as in the example of the Bolshoi, which frequently selects and trains dancers from peripheral backgrounds originating from social projects in favelas, in shanty towns. Perhaps it is worth mentioning Russian literature, which has a lot of prestige, in Brazil. One of the ways to create a positive visibility, especially outside of context in the state of Paraná, where Ukrainians have a lot of visibility, not just in Prudentópolis, like Dr. Ferraro said, but also in Curitiba, Antônio Linto, Malé, other cities of the Paraná or north of Santa Catarina, is though the work of Embassy of Ukraine in Brazil in the field of cultural diplomacy, and Mr. Oskar Slushenko is doing a very good job. Also, Mr. Erman. Regarding the Brazilian government, it has taken a position of what I can say pro-Russian neutrality. The same government that in the crisis with Trump administration defended that it would not relinquish its sovereignty. I heard the phrase, the sentence, Brazilian sovereignty is non-negotiable. The same government that defends that Brazil belongs to Brazilians defends that the sovereignty of Ukraine is negotiable, that Ukraine does not belong to Ukrainians. Here's the challenge. Ukraine is not part of Russia. It has been occupied by foreign force for centuries and deserves to be free, sovereign. And my daily struggle as intellectual engaged and intellectual is to try to spread our cause, the Ukrainian cause. Scholars in Brazil usually carry, as Dr. Ferraz said, this anti-American feeling, which would be at the root of the perception, even if discreet, more aligned with Russian in this war. That stance favored by Trump in favor of Putin today do not seem to affect the perception that Russia is solely responsible for this war. Since 2023, I have been following mobilizations of professors and students from university engaging in the Palestinian genocide, what they call Palestinian genocide. And the question I raise is where there is no mobilization against the human rights violations in Russia commits every day in Ukraine. And for instance, the kidnapped Ukrainian children. I don't have much hope that the Brazilian authorities will get involved in the war, somehow contribute to Ukraine's efforts, or even that scholars and university students will recognize the Ukrainian struggle and resistance in the pursuit of a just and lasting peace. As for the general population, the war seems to be something far and not part of everyday life or daily conversations. In this way, it's a challenge to try to show that this war is part of a broader context and that it should involve the whole world. I have tried to warn, but with little success. since the concerns are very contextual, both for current government and for Brazilian population, even those with Ukrainian roots. So thank you, Duże Dziękuję, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavalcanti, about this broad picture of Brazilian society. Are there any questions to the speaker? Well, my question will be how do you evaluate actually the level of political impact of Brazilians of Ukrainian origin in Brazilian politics, and how they can rise this political influence of Ukrainian community here?
I see usual. Well, the Brazilians with well, it seems Brazil is a polarized society. It seems there is a lot of polarization. What I see is people using the speech of of a politician to give more to using against the adversary. I don't know if that's the answer. You mean the general population or Brazilian with Ukrainian roots?
Brazilians with Ukrainian roots, yes.
Well, usually Brazilians with Ukrainian roots lives in Paraná. Paraná used to support Bolsonaro. So when Bolsonaro had been to Russia 1 week before the beginning of the war, the full-scale invasion, there was not so there were not so critical posts in internet, for instance, as when for instance, Lula posts about the war and make some critics about Ukrainian president or seeing Ukraine as have some guilty in this full-scale invasion. So I think there is appropriation of the speech of the politics, the political people used to support to use against the other about the other political. So there is a instrumentalization of the war in these political terms, in this context of the polarization. I don't know if it is successful. I was successful answering your question, Mr. Erman.
We can speak later more about this topic. Thank you so much. I would like to present the next speaker, Mr. Fabrício Vitorino, digital journalism specialist, PhD candidate, Federal University of Santa Catarina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erman. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you all. I thank my colleagues for their presentations, and I'd like to thank a lot for this invitation by the Ukrainian Embassy in Brazil. And beforehand, I'd like to congratulate the Ukrainian Embassy in Brazil for its work in the last months, which is something very remarkable due to the scenario that has been portrayed here, especially the incidents such the ones that took place at the University of Brasilia. They are very representative in a way that we can see that Russia has been operating here, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for over 30 years now, maybe 4 years. They used to operate Golstraci here in Brazil for decades now. So it's going to take a lot of effort in order to counter this equation. So it's not going to be very helpful to fight their sphere of influence, but I'm going to propose here a small framework to be embraced, or at least to be thought of, in order to start changing this scenario. Well, I'm going to approach this question, how Ukraine and Brazil could cooperate more from three positions that rarely converge. As a journalist, and I've been covering Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Caucasus since the early 2000s. As a researcher in international relations, as someone who believes that literature and culture could shape the political perception as much as policy does. I'm not saying that to claim neutrality. I do not believe in neutrality, in that is not something that is possible when children are kidnapped. But I'm going to say that I may understand how Moscow thinks and how Brasilia thinks, and why those two logics are not identical, even when they produce similar outcomes. These three lenses, journalism, international relations, and cultural standpoint, they lead to the same conclusion. Brazil is a strategic player that needs managing, and it's not a moral problem, and we don't need correcting. Management requires a toolkit, not indignation. And I'm gonna start off with some things that I've heard in last October, when I've been to Odessa and Kyiv and Lviv. At a lecture, the first question from students was not about international relations, theory, or journalism, or even football. It was direct and it was sharp. Why does Brazil not help us? Why did Lula go to Moscow on the Victory Day? And why do you abstain when children are deported? And beneath that question was another one, unspoken but unmistakable. Is Brazil aligned with Russia? And that perception is not irrational. From a Ukrainian standpoint, looking at voting patterns, symbolic gestures, and rhetoric, the conclusion seems obvious. But the conclusion, if left uncleared, leads to a strategic dead end. Because if Ukraine treats Brazil as a lost cause, as an ideological ally of Moscow, then Brazil becomes exactly that. Not because it was destined to be, but because no one bothered to make its ambiguity expensive. So let me be clear about what Brazil is doing, because understanding this matters for what comes next. Brazil is practicing what in international relations we call hedging. And hedging is a strategy common amongst middle powers in polarized systems. It means not choosing sides definitively, maintaining channels with all poles, preserving future flexibility. And Brazil is not confused, not at all. It is deliberately ambiguous. But here is the critical point. Hedging only works when that ambiguity has a cost. When no one disputes your position anymore, when your flexibility stops generating leverage, hedging collapses into comfort, and comfort leads to irrelevance. Now, many of you will have heard the argument that Brazil's position reflects ideological alignment with Russia. And I'm going to complicate that thesis a little bit more, because it is both true and misleading. Yes, Brazilian left, the government Workers' Party, has historical affinity with Moscow, rooted in anti-Americanism, support for BRICS, the push for de-dollarization, and deep skepticism about NATO expansion. Speaking to Brazilian diplomats off the record, the refrain is consistent. We cannot afford to lose BRICS credibility. BRICS has become more than an economic forum for Brazil. It is a political platform for challenging Western-dominated multilateralism. Aligned against Russia is the UN. Aligned against Russia in the UN, from Brazil's perspective, weakens that platform. But Brazil's far-right opposition also maintains affinity with the Kremlin for entirely different reasons. Authoritarian governance models, media control, conservative social policies, and hostility to liberal human rights frameworks. So here is the paradox. Both sides of Brazil's political spectrum have reasons to be comfortable with Moscow. This is convergent interest from opposing directions. And that makes the problem structural, not partisan. This is also why hedging works so well for Brazil. When both left and right have reasons to avoid confrontations with Moscow, ambiguity becomes the path of least resistance for any government. You cannot solve this by waiting for a different administration. You can only solve it by raising the cost of comfort for every administration. And this brings me to the uncomfortable reality about Ukrainian advocacy in Brazil. The Ukrainian diaspora and Brazil-Ukraine Parliamentary Commission have a very clear political alignment, as Claudio said, and due to that fact, they face structural difficulties engaging the current administration. This creates a problem. You may be speaking loudly, but you are speaking to people who do not control foreign policy. The Itamaraty does not respond to opposition pressure at all. It responds to institutional weight from actors it recognizes as legitimate. As long as Ukrainian advocacy in Brazil is coded with partisan opposition, it will be dismissed as external interference in domestic politics, and it took place over the last year and prior to that, and at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. But Brazil is not monolithic. And I'm going to be blunt. If soldiers can set aside personal differences to defend Mariupol, for instance, political actors can set aside partisan preferences to defend Ukraine's interests in Brasilia. The cause is larger than any domestic alignment. And if it's not, then the wrong people are in those positions. And this has to change. And the Foreign Relations Committee in Brazil's Congress, representing multiple parties, issued a statement criticizing the abstention that we saw at the United Nations 3 weeks ago. This matters. It shows that the consensus is not as solid as the Itamaraty pretends. There are institutional actors inside Brazil who recognize the contradiction. Ukraine's task is to amplify those voices, not to bypass those voices. And this brings me to the central risk that many in this room may not see that clearly yet. The greatest danger for Ukraine is not Brazil opposes you, is that Brazil becomes irrelevant to you. When that happens, 3 things occur simultaneously. Moscow gains exclusivity in dialogue with Brasilia. The Brazilian Foreign Ministry pays no cost whatsoever for its ambiguity, and the rhetoric of mediation becomes an empty alibi. Irrelevance is comfortable. Hostility at least forces engagement. But an irrelevant Brazil is a Brazil that Kyiv no longer disputes and that Moscow can rely on without any effort. So the question is not how to convert Brazil, is how to prevent Brazil from becoming comfortable with this ambiguity. There is a literary dimension to this that matters. I always quote Yuri Knorozov, one of the Ukrainian's most important contemporary writers. He has written extensively about Ukraine's historical fate as a gray zone. Not quite Europe, not quite Eurasia, not quite Russia, always someone else's buffer, never anyone's priority. And that gray zone thinking is precisely what informs Ukrainian frustration with Brazil today. When Brazil speaks of dialogue and balance, what Ukraine hears is, you are not important enough for us to take a clear position. But there's a paradox. If Ukraine responds by writing Brazil off entirely, it confirms that Brazil is irrelevant. And once again, irrelevance in that context is Moscow's victory by default. So what can Ukraine actually do? I want to offer a framework in 3 operational layers, based not on idealism, but on where Brazilian hedging is genuinely vulnerable. What I have learned across multiple contexts from Middle East, where hedging is not a diplomatic concept, but it's a survival strategy, is that middle powers, such as Brazil, only shift when the cost of this ambiguity becomes unbearable. Brazil has not reached that point yet, and Ukraine's task now is to make it reach that point. The first layer is institutional engagement that bypasses the closed circuit. The Brazilian Foreign Ministry, the Itamaraty, is currently locked. Trying to change it directly through moral pressure will fail. But Brazil is not a monolith. There are fractures. Parliamentary human rights commissions operate with different logics. The Federal Prosecutor's Office has jurisdiction over international humanitarian matters. Brazilian states and municipalities have legal competence in decentralized cooperation. Santa Catarina, Paraná, for example, two Brazilian states, had significant Ukrainian diaspora and has shown interest in direct partnerships, as we talked about today. These are not symbolic gestures. They are alternative institutional channels that do not require converting the foreign ministry. The second layer, reputational cost. This is where specificity matters. Ukraine should invite Brazil to co-finance concrete humanitarian initiatives under international supervision, family reunification programs, educational reconstruction projects, demining cooperations with verifiable benchmarks. These are signs that engagement is not possible. President Lula and President Zelensky have spoken. There are modest areas of bilateral cooperations, but these remain rhetorical and symbolic. The test is whether Brazil is willing to move from statements to measurable commitments. If Brazil accepts operational engagement, well, you gain leverage for future accountability. But if Brazil refuses, you document the contradiction between its human rights discourse and its practice. And let me remind you that Brazil is governed by Lula, which is a leftist, and human rights is all about the left ideology. Either outcome is useful. The key is to stop asking Brazil for votes and start demanding deliverables. Then use the forums where Brazil seeks leaderships, the UN Human Rights Council, the G20, to expose those inconsistencies. When I speak to European and American journalists covering this war, the question is about Brazil is always the same. Why does Brazil still talk about mediation when no one believes it anymore? The skepticism is your asset. Brazil wants to be seen as responsible middle power. Make that aspiration expensive. The third layer is narrative contestation within the Global South. Brazil frames its position as representative of the Global South's refusal to align automatically with Western powers. But that framing is empirically weak. Philippines, Kenya, Colombia insert in votes. These are countries from the Global South that have supported Ukraine in critical resolutions. Brazil's abstention is not the norm, is an outlier, and Ukraine needs to make that visible, not by framing this as West versus Russia, which will not work in Latin America, as we said here, even later, sooner in the Latin America Forum, but by framing it as a question of coherence. Does the Global South defend international law when it's costly or only when it's convenient? That is a question that resonates in Brazilian civil society, in academia, in parts of the press. You will not change Brasilia by talking to Brasilia alone. You change it by raising the domestic cost of inconsistency. And let me return to where I began. The students in Odessa asked me if Brazil is aligned with Russia. My answer is always no, it is not. Not ideologically, but functionally through inaction and comfort. The effect can be similar. And that distinction matters because ideology is harder to shift than cost structures. Brazil will not become Ukraine's ally in this war, but it does not need to become irrelevant either. The space between opposition and irrelevance is where strategic work can happen. It requires patience, it requires diplomacy, and it requires a long framework. Precision and willingness to treat adversaries not as they should be, but as they are, identifying where they are vulnerable and where pressure can be applied without breaking engagement entirely. So the title of this panel asks how Ukraine can gain support from Brazil. My honest answer is not through conversion, but through pressure, mild pressure. Not through moral appeals alone, but through making ambiguity expensive. The students in Odessa that I met, they deserve better than empty rhetoric about peace and dialogue. They deserve a strategy. And a strategy begins with seeing clearly, acting precisely, and refusing to let comfort be masqueraded as neutrality. And Brazil needs that push. Brazil needs to change. But once again, we are fighting a structure that has been operating here for over 30 years, for 40 years, for 15 years. And we have been working for what, 2 years now. So that is the framework that I'm proposing now. The diplomatic, and it's costly, and sometimes it's very, very exhausting. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fabrício Vitorino, for your proposals. Are there any questions to the speaker? So the next speaker is Mr. Fabio Lampert, representative of the Department of Philosophy, University of Vienna.
Thank you, Heorhii. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, and it is very nice to see friendly faces and some friends that I don't see very often on this call. So I am just an academic. I am just a philosopher. I don't know how the Brazilian government operates. I've never been in government. I don't know exactly what are the dynamics that Ukraine could profit, that could help Brazil to cooperate more with Ukraine. So I'll speak like Vicente did, more from the perspective of the academy, and I'll basically complement what Vicente, Fabrício, and Claudio already said about Brazil and about the situation amongst academics. So with respect to the government, I think Brazil has made certain decisions 25 years ago, and it is following through with its decisions. As Fabrício mentioned, Brazil, there are certain views according to which it is aligned with Russia, certain views according to which it is not, but it is certainly aligned with BRICS and with this project. And it is very difficult, I think, to change those decisions now. But having said that, Brazil is not in a position to choose partners. It's a medium regional power with severe economic difficulties and challenges, and governments, they respond to economic interests and to necessity. Ukraine is an agricultural power, and this is an area that it could try to align with Brazil's interest to, say, invade the market positively in a way that could cooperate more with Brazil. The private sector may be more promising in this area, but this is certainly an area that it could be costly, and it is certainly a necessity for Brazil. For instance, now Brazil imports a great amount of its fertilizers from Russia. Ukraine is a great producer of fertilizers. This is an area which Ukraine could align with Brazilian interests. But I would like to focus on just certain themes concerning academia, and most of it has already been touched on. So this is a long-term project. As Fabrício mentioned, Russia has been investing in close contacts with Brazil and Latin American countries for decades, and it has established relationships with universities. There are cultural perceptions that are kind of cemented about Russia and about the Soviet Union even, and those things are difficult to change, but they do change, and we live in a world that is changing rapidly, and I do believe that it is possible to change perceptions amongst academics if there is the opportunity and if we use those opportunities very well. So just to make some quick suggestions, we've talked about this in the group that Vicente mentioned, the Center for Ukrainian Studies. There is a great need of translating more Ukrainian literature into Portuguese. I've tried for a whole year to get in touch with publishing houses in Brazil to translate a contemporary Ukrainian philosopher, and I was not successful. So it is very tough for single academics to get this done. And I think if there are institutions that Ukraine supports, or if Ukraine has some connections or partnerships with Brazilian institutions or publishing houses, perhaps some institutions could do this job better and have Ukrainian literature translated. I am very well aware that some classics of Ukrainian literature are translated into Portuguese, and some Ukrainian poets are translated. But contemporary literature in Ukraine is basically the way I came to know about Ukraine. So if one reads Serhii Zhadan's novel, The Orphanage, for instance, it is impossible to read that and not be aware of what's happening in the Donbass since 2014. It is impossible to read Andrei Kurkov's Grey Bees, that even though I know it is written in Russian, you just cannot read that and not know what Russia has been doing to the Crimean Tatars since 2014 and in the Donbas region. It is a perfect way of bringing awareness to the oppression of Ukrainians since the first Russian invasion in 2014. Those books, and also including Yuri Andrukovich that Fabrício mentioned, books like the Moscoviad, those books are not translated in Brazil. Some of those books you can find Portuguese translations in Portugal. But if you go to the Brazilian Amazon right now, you will see that those books, they cost the equivalent of 100 euros for Brazilians. They will never spend that on a book. Those books need to be translated by Brazilian publishing houses. This is very important. I've had this experience last year when I went to Brazil. Even though I live in Europe, I would go there on vacation. I went into bookstores. You find whole sections on Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in Brazilian bookstores. Brazilians love Russian literature. You see nothing about Ukrainian literature. There's simply no access to this. I was in Germany in February 2022 when full-scale invasion happened. Since that time, German bookstores had whole sections on Ukraine. You would always, when you would go into a bookstore, you always find a whole section with books from political scientists, literature, history, and so on. And so it is very tough not to at least think of buying a book. But even for academics, which is the point I was making before, there is a lack of access, and Brazilian academics tend not to assign books that are written in English or in different idioms. If it's not in Portuguese, it is very tough to use it in the classroom. So we need that. We need also academic books that are crucial to Ukraine that are not translated into Portuguese. So I have three examples with me. There's one book by Peter Pomerantsev on Russian propaganda called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. This was the first book I read about contemporary Russia. And again, it's a perfect entry to understand the mechanisms of Russian propaganda and basically the reality show Russian propaganda has become since Putin. The Russo-Ukrainian War by Serhii Plokhy is translated in Portugal. It is not translated in Brazil. Brazilians won't buy this book. Brazilian academics won't see this book, and they won't consider assigning it because it's just too expensive. This book needs to be translated in Brazil. So the Russo-Ukrainian War by the best, or one of the best Ukrainian historians that teaches at Harvard, it has simply all the hallmarks of a book that people will be interested in. And one other book, which is just the final example, there's this book by Mary Sarraute called Not 1 Inch, published by Yale University Press. It is basically the definitive book on, until someone writes a better one, on NATO expansion, Russia, the US, and it touches on all the points concerning the initial negotiations between NATO, Russia, the Soviet Union, and so on. What happened with NATO expansion? Was there a promise to Gorbachev that NATO wouldn't expand? Was there not? this sort of book is not translated in Brazil. And so people don't read it, they don't assign it. So it is very tough to get more information, even if you're an academic, because people either try to find information online or they simply will read whatever it's available. Finally, I think this has been said, and some people have mentioned already some initiatives on the chat. We need Ukrainian academics visiting Brazil, and we need Brazilian academics visiting Ukraine. But not only that, pro-Russian positions in academia are fringe positions. Great scholars, great historians, great political scientists, great philosophers, they are all sympathetic to Ukraine. People who started defending Russian talking points are basically fringe in academia. The people publishing by the best publishing houses, Oxford University Press, Yale, Harvard, and so on, they're all sympathetic to Ukraine. There's people like Tim Snyder, who is constantly in Ukraine, Marcy Shore, and Applebaum. These people need to go to Brazil. It is expensive to bring them. I don't know how this could be done, but this will need to involve probably Ukrainian institutions, some cooperation with universities. These people are heard by academics. And so I think it's really important if they could visit Brazil to simply speak about their research. And their research is about Ukraine. Just to give you one option about my field in philosophy, people have been discussing just war theory for centuries. The best scholar in just war theory in philosophy, Jeff McMahon, he teaches at Oxford. He wrote a paper recently about the Russo-Ukrainian war, defending the Ukrainian resistance to Russia as a just war, and of course, the Russian invasion as a war of aggression, and so on. People read what Jeff writes, and whatever he writes, it's always obviously in English, and it's difficult to assign those articles in Brazil. But this is also a sort of person that should visit the country. And I think some Ukrainian-related institutions in partnership with Brazilian universities could try some initiatives like that. So it may even be easier to bring academics from North America or England than elsewhere. And those academics that defend Ukraine and are great in their fields, they could be really helpful for Ukraine. It is excellent that Alexandra Matvichuk was in Brazil recently, and some Ukrainian activists are starting to visit the country. I think we need more. This, in a way, is soft power, and this is something that Ukraine has, I think, and it has great human capital. It needs to use it, and it needs to use it in Latin America and Brazil. Again, lots of great scholars and academics are sympathizers and are pro-Ukraine and are very vocal, and we simply don't hear about them in Brazil, and they're not there. They need to visit. Heorhii, you made a great point about historical commonalities between Ukraine and Brazil. I think it is very easy for Brazilians to identify with the Ukrainian cause. As Vicente mentioned, most of the Brazilian people is pro-Ukraine. There's actually empirical surveys showing that. Those fringe voices in academia, unfortunately, I wouldn't say are the majority in academia, but they exist, and they are sometimes very loud. But we can also say invade the market of ideas in Brazil with good ideas. And instead of fighting Russian propaganda by simply taking down the talking points from Russia, it might be more profitable to start producing positive ideas pro-Ukraine by translating Ukrainians and by bringing academics. So I think Brazilian public opinion matters, and the opinion of academics matter. In the future, those will be the politicians that will rule the country anyway. And if they had access to some of those voices in the university, that can help Ukraine in the long term, even though it's not a short-term solution to Ukraine's issues. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this this discourse about translations of Ukrainian literature. Actually, this year we have some positive news. It was published Andrei Kurkov, Diario Daguerre in Ukraine. It was published Poesia, book of Maxim Krivtsov, famous Ukrainian poet who died during this war, who was killed on the front line. It was published Ljubko Dereš fiction book, and we expect also Oksana Zabushko fiction book in the next month. Well, it's very important. I can say that everything is connected with finance, and even the number of books which were published is not sufficient. Just this week I tried to buy 15 books of Andrei Kurkov in Brasilia, Diario Daguerre. And this book was actually published in January, I think. But here I found in 10 bookstores only 11 books. I need 15. Well, it's very important issue. Thank you for the idea of translation of Sergei Plokhy book. We will try the next year continue our work to promote these translations, especially Ukrainian classical literature, because even right now we have at least several books translated of the contemporary Ukrainian writers, but Brazilians definitely don't know about Lesya Ukrainka, Mikhailo Kotyubinsky, other famous classic writers. So yeah, it's hard to compete with Dostoevsky in this case when everybody is interested to publish books of this Russian writer. Well, are there any questions to the speaker?
Yeah, I have some comments.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, let me try turn on my camera. Just a second. Okay. Hello, everyone. So I studied translation actually, and so I have a couple of ideas. Today, this new Ukrainian university was mentioned that was inaugurated a short while in Brazil. And when I was a student, we had an informal nucleus translators who I experienced would offer their help to younger specialists, to students. In Brazil, you can form a nucleus of people, of volunteers, who are editors, who can offer mentorship to aspiring translators so that they give feedback, review some translations, suggest improvements in their free time if they want. And another one is also just an idea. I don't know if it's legally possible in Ukraine. And when I was a student, I dreamt of the format when you don't write a research paper, but you make a real life project. So you don't write about, 18th century English literature, because English was my first foreign language, but you go to a film studio and you produce subtitles for a film, and then this film is actually shown somewhere, and your name is in the titles. And that would give additional motivation to students because they would see the result of their work, and that would be something practical that can be used. And he already mentioned the financial constraints. If it's possible to involve students in these kind of projects when they make something practical for free, that would solve this financial constraint problem, because they would translate a film, for example, that will be shown in Brazil, or they will translate a book that will be then published. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your idea. We will discuss it in our special group of Ukrainian community in Brazil. Well, the next speaker is Ure Fancelli, international relations analyst, commentator of at CNN Portugal and many other Brazilian outlets. And very big friend of Ukraine.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. I see some familiar faces that I'm a very great admirer of. So I think I will start with, we should start with the most difficult question, which is why should Brazilians care? I think if Ukraine wants to gain support in Brazil, it has to start with the level at the public opinion. Because as we've seen, the Brazilian government's approach towards Russia is not, and I disagree slightly with my colleagues, but it's not pragmatic as people would think. Of course, there is the BRICS interest, but at the same time, Russia is not in a position where it can discard a partnership with Latin America's largest country. And why is that? Because it needs the legitimacy stamp from a democratic regime. So, meaning criticism of the war and the Russian actions will not break their relations. And when I say this, that this government's relations with Russia is ideological, it is because it has the same approach with other authoritarian regimes such as Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and Brazil has criticized many other allies, democratic ones, even larger and more important trading partners than Russia for much less. The US did not even attack Venezuela directly, but President Lula, and amid conversations with Donald Trump because of the tariffs, he did not think twice before condemning Trump's bravado. So the US is also Brazil's second largest trade partner. That's why I say that it has to begin with the public opinion and with the most uncomfortable question. For many Brazilians, the war feels distant, European, and disconnected from everyday problems at home. So the answer can't be guilt or moral pressure. It has to be about shared logic. Brazilians understand very well what it means to be ignored. And that's exactly the bridge, because if borders can be changed by force and basic rules collapse, countries that are superpowers are not superpowers are always the first to lose. So this should not be sold as Europe versus Russia, but whether international rules still protect countries like Brazil. And something very important, not from invasion. And I see that sometimes Ukraine uses this argument, like you might be next. It should work with countries such as Poland, Estonia, Finland, but not with Brazil. You should use other broader issues, other kinds of threats. For example, election intervention, arbitrary military actions, unilateral ones in a time when the US is militarizing our region. That's the sort of thing that should work more. And one thing that you could do is use the children issue as the entry point. The question of Ukrainian children taken from the occupied territories, I think it's crucial because it cuts through geopolitical issues and goes straight to values. And you don't need to follow or even to like NATO or understand the battlefield to know that taking children from their families is something wrong. And when Brazil abstains from a UN vote calling for the return, this doesn't sound I don't think it sounds neutral to the public. It sounds morally uncomfortable. And that's why this issue is so powerful, because it reframes the debate from strategy and alliances to basic human protection. When you have to work with neutrality, not against it. Neutrality has real support in Brazil, and pretending otherwise, I think it's a big mistake. Brazilian society is divided and there's no appetite for choosing sides. So Ukraine's message should not be like pick a side, pick a camp, but defend principles. And defending civilians, children, and international law does not force Brazil into a military bloc. I think it simply gives substance to neutrality instead of emptying it of meaning. It is not my position. I mean, I am here. I was in Kiev last month, but I'm speaking of the broader public. That's why I say it. You have also to maybe make the war feel less European only. Ukraine also needs to be seen not just as an European issue, but as part of a global erosion of rules that affect everyone. When international law weakens, the consequences, they don't stop at Europe's borders. Then you can always talk about food prices, energy shocks, disinformation, democratic cynicism, something that is very, that appeals very much to Brazil. So the argument is not like, look at us, but look at the kind of world that emerges when this becomes acceptable. And I think maybe I'll end here because we're almost, we passed the time that we had agreed on. But I think something very important is that you should put Brazilian voices at the center. And I don't mean it in a way that to lower the Ukrainian role that you should play. But in Brazil, I think that who delivers the message matters as much as the message itself. And Ukrainian officials alone, they will not be able to move the public opinion in Brazil. So the most effective voices are Brazilian jurists, academics, journalists, faith leaders, lawmakers, civil society organizations, and speaking from Brazilian values to the Brazilian audiences. And when concern comes from inside the country, I think it carries far more weight than any external appeals. And of course, there's the language factor. And yes, I think I would end here. That was my brief opinion.
Thank you so much for your opinion. Are there any questions to the speaker?
I have a small comment that maybe it would be interesting to some groups in Brazil that research disinformation to partner with Ukrainian groups. For example, there is an organization called Open Minds that does a great job. And to conduct a research how Russian influence is spread, maybe it would be possible to find something interesting, you know, something that we haven't seen on the surface, and then present this report to academicians and to politicians as well.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is an investigative journalist. But I would like to add shortly that, well, about defending values. So this month was a bright example of this discussion about defending values when not only Ukrainian diplomats but Western diplomats persuaded Brazil to vote for this resolution about children. So the argument was that, well, kidnapped children, yes, but the Russian side tells us that there are not 19,000 kidnapped children, so the number is not exact. Well, so in these conditions, it's very difficult to defend values. Of course, I think that we will meet some support from civil society organizations. Yeah, but the decision-making process is concentrated in some federal institutions. Yeah. Thank you. And the final speaker today. Yes.
May I have one comment?
Yes.
I think it's very interesting what Yuri mentioned, and I think it's also related to what Fabio mentioned, that like I agree with Fabio that the ideas of these pro-Russian scholars are like fringe, they are very strange and Bojevili, they are very crazy. But unfortunately, I think that many people in Brazil don't consider, at least inside academia, don't consider them as fringe. Like there are many respected teachers, scholars that have like many students that follow them, that respect them, and they are very influential, and they have like they are really maybe abroad these fringe scholars they are not respected, but inside Brazil they are respected. Even Meschmeyer is respected in some fields in Brazil. So like the connection with which Urian mentioned is that maybe we have to find more people in academia that can fight the arguments of these Brazilian scholars. So like inside academia, we can't bring like people from outside academia because they will not be listened. We have to find more people inside the Brazilian academia to counterbalance these fringe arguments that are really influential. So I think that the idea of Urian is very interesting. Like we need like Brazilian voices too, like to fight these other crazy fringe Brazilian voices that unfortunately are really respected inside Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. And the final speaker is Mr. Sergei Prokopenko, chief editor of Gwara Media from Kharkiv region. He visited Brazil this year, met with many journalists, visited several editorial houses in July, and also was one of the speakers during palestra about Russian disinformation in São Paulo, and also provided a class about journalism in war-torn country for the students of journalism in Universidade Federal Rio de Janeiro. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, dear colleagues. Nice to see you. Nice to hear you. My name is Sergei Prokopenko. I'm editor of Gwara. I'm speaking with you right now from Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine, and our team is working right here, right now. And I represent Gwara Media as local media outlets that have only one English presence from Kharkiv, from the ground. And another specific, this was part of our discussion while traveling this year to Brazil. We are a verified fact-check organization that works with local and national disinformation. And last time, while our visits, one of the biggest challenges was to understand fast how disinformation landscape is working in Brazil, how it works. And for me, it was very valuable that Brazilian researchers do their work analyzing different streams of disinformation. It's helped us a lot to quickly orient in the moment of our trip to Brazil. We were in Brazil because of a global fact-checking summit that was happening this year in Rio. And what we understood from the time, from that visit, is that discussions about disinformation and media literacy on the local level will always struggle with their impact because of the domination of technological platform, domination of artificial intelligence is going on and going to scale up more and more. And we started to find a way how we, as media specialists and journalists, can react on this issue. And our response was, and we were testing this response a few years already. We started last 3 years to work with research on the intersection of journalism and on the intersection of science, because we understood that in order to move forward with country disinformation, it's very important cooperation of professional media organization, media institutions with scientific and research community, because media organizations are having access to the ground and having access to the data, but they don't have opportunity to work with research. And we started to experiment by engaging local researchers and local stakeholders, and published few articles and connected around our fact-checking department few of institutions here in Kharkiv and Ukraine, because we consider and we saw and still see that frontline regions are unique laboratories of data and social mechanism and psychological mechanism, how society are coping and adapting with crises of enormous level, of enormous intensity, in terms of informational resilience, in terms of societal resilience. So that we started these experiments 3 years ago, and we received quite good results. Like some of our articles were fetched to the repositories of globally recognized institutions, despite it's maybe not the best journals, but that's kind of verified institution with verified methodologies, verified practices. And we think that this might be one of the solutions for countering disinformation, starting discussing it global agenda and how it influences on our local community. Because if we don't work with disinformation on the bridge with local, national, international level, we have this chain distorted and disrupted. And in the end, we are like Don Quixotes, yes, like the guys who are fighting with wind farms, and these wind farms will continue more and more and more because of race of artificial intelligence, race of technologies, race of platform domination. And after this visit to Brazil, we understand that this may be the only one possible way for us as local fact checkers to grow and to bring impact, because without this research, we could not be able to move forward. And one of the ideas how this happens is when we arrived to Rio, we had just a couple of weeks of preparation and 1 or 2 weeks very intensive program there. And while during our palestra, we understood that we don't have data so much, verified data, because journalism and stories that I was looking for, even presentations of institutions, they might be biased, they might be having angle, and it's very difficult to resist criticism for kind of biased sides, because we need to grow in impact, we need to grow in this dissemination of this information. And when public debates about issue of disinformation happens, this often comes a story that, oh, your position is biased, la la la. And our opinion here in Kharkiv is that proven scientific research regarding disinformation, with collaboration with international newsrooms, international editors, with professionals, would be able to pass through this glass wall, I would say, yes. And that's our position. That's how we are looking at this situation and moving forward. That's kind of one of the research that I found in 30 minutes while sitting at the hotel, and it gave me quick description of what's happening in Brazil. And as different analytical reports institution of left-wing and right-wing has disseminated their information, I'm more tied to such reports and was even showing these students. So the message here is that in our opinion, here in Kharkiv, in Ukraine, we think that discussion about resistance and countering disinformation and deep dive into it should be happening on scientific level. And I have a PhD in communication received this year. In scope of it, I've also studied these activities. And next year, we plan to conduct in Kharkiv first Global Disinformation Forum in Kharkiv, organized by us as independent NGO. And our goal is to activate and stimulate local researchers from Ukraine that are having unique data, but sometimes they don't understand this because they are in survival mode. And we are trying to activate them to discuss this issue and wake them up. Because their context is unique, but their pressure is also unique. So we're trying to enable them and engage them into free panels that we want to invite you, to collaborate with us, to invite to send your abstracts, and maybe somebody of you would be even able to share some keynote speech in this topic, because global disinformation is actual for any democratical nation, especially those who are in crises. And I see a big potential to share this expertise and knowledge regarding global information that influence Ukraine. It's also influence Brazil and Latin America. And it's also interesting for us to study what's happening there. And I think it might be interesting for Brazilian scholars to study what's happening here in Ukraine. Because, for example, in Kharkiv, we have a lot of technology-oriented researchers that works with different language models, different technologies, and that's the scope that our organization plans to activate next years and to invite you for collaboration. And the last message is that, just to repeat, that in our opinion, as journalists and fact checkers, future impact of studying disinformation is engaging local data from different regions in scope of problems of global disinformation and creating verified academic research that might be referred to different stakeholders that would showing up the problems, and might propose a solution for global disinformation. Because when we start to speak about this disinformation, it looks like endless problem. But I hope that with science and bright minds and strategic and journalistic communication, this might help to solve this issue. So thank you for this moment. I invite you to be in touch and took part in a conference that we plan to do next year in Kharkiv, that is multidisciplinary and practitioner-oriented and scientific-oriented. And thank you for this opportunity to present our work. And you can look some of our research that I shared here, then send them to the Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. Are there any questions to the speaker? So I would like to thank everybody for your time, for your efforts, for your inclusion to this topic of Ukrainian-Brazilian relations. It's very important for Ukrainian people to have support from Brazilian side, to have support of Brazilian people. As we see right now, we have many challenges. Right now, it's like a financial situation and some Russian propagandist efforts, and of course, broad history of Russian projects here in Brazil, and some ideological prejudice from some people. But anyway, always there are some people. I would like to thank you, everybody, who are working to establish more developed relations between Ukraine and Brazil, Ukrainian and Brazilian societies. So your impact for humanitarian cooperation is enormous. And the next year we would like to have more activities in Brazil. So this year we had some lectures, some events dedicated to Ukraine, to war only in 6 federal units. But the next year we will try to rise this number till at least 14. And as an embassy, the embassy of Ukraine in Brazil also will help to realize all these ideas which were discussed today, and that ideas which you are working right now. I would like to thank you for this participation, and I hope we will meet not many times the next year in both online and offline format in Brazil or in Ukraine. I wish you all happy Christmas and happy New Year with more new meetings, new happy events in your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Дякуємо, Джордж.
Feliz Natal, Feliz Ano Novo.
Дякую.
Obrigado, foi um prazer.
Prazer.
Pleasure.
До побачення.
Вітання.
Bom fim de semana.